we'll never see a player change the sport like Wilt Chamberlain did when he entered the league. He revolutionized the game and broke hundreds of records that still stand today. He reached a level that we're never gonna see. From his rookie year up to the 1963/64 season, he averaged a combined 41.7 points on 51% shooting, 25.2 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. He tallied 16,303 points and 9,875 rebounds. To put that into context, he recorded more points than James Worthy and more rebounds than Bob Lanier did for their entire careers. Despite these mind-blowing numbers, he experienced a lot of ups and downs. He would win the MVP one year and threaten to quit the next. He would miss the playoffs one year and reach the finals the next. There is no one more polarizing than Wilt the Stilt. We're going to break down what occurred in each season, and you'll get the full context of the most legendary 5-year stretch. We've seen some impressive seasons from players who were in their rookie year, but there was only one player who came into the league and was undeniably the best in the world. There is only one player who was so dominant in their first year that the league was forced to change the rules to make the game fair for everyone else. He didn't just lead the league in scoring, rebounds, and minutes played. He shattered records. There were 5 total games in which he scored over 50 points. His most impressive performance came against the Detroit Pistons, where he had 58 points and 42 rebounds. There were 27 other games where he scored over 40 points. That includes 4 instances where he posted over 40 points and 40 rebounds. We are talking about numbers that people didn't think were humanly possible to reach at a professional level, but Wilt exposed the league. There is nobody close to having the size or strength to contain him. Bill Russell was the only player who had the mental fortitude to take the beating, but he was still physically overmatched. Just to put it in perspective, Wilt was over 4 inches taller and 60 pounds heavier than Russell. So out of the 12 times that they faced each other, there were 7 times that he scored over 40 points, which included a 53-point performance. If he was putting up numbers like that against him, imagine what he was doing to every other poor soul. Then, on the defensive side, he intimidated all rival teams with his inside presence, just as Bill Russell did. Opponents were forced to pass up easy shots repeatedly because they feared Wilt would spike the ball out of the arena. He was the biggest cheat code that a team can have, so it should be no surprise that the Warriors improved by 17 wins in his first season there. However, he didn't just change the fortunes of his team, he changed the landscape of the sport. For example, the league banned offensive goaltending because Wilt could jump over the top of the rim and guide the ball to the basket. Then there was a rule that players had to release the ball behind the foul line when attempting a free throw. Seems like common sense now, but the rule had to be implemented because Wilt had the physical ability to take off from the free throw line and either dunk it or lay it in. The league knew it had to do something to avoid making everyone else look bad. That's not good for business. But on the other hand, he quickly became the league's main attraction for his world-class abilities. That is definitely good for business. According to Sports Illustrated, he drew 500,000 new fans into NBA arenas single-handedly, and in one season, he made basketball a paying attraction for people who, before he appeared, wouldn't have attended a game with complimentary tickets. That is a direct quote. They later mentioned that Wilt was as valuable to the sport as Babe Ruth was to baseball. There's never going to be another player who will have that kind of impact on a sport in their first year than what Wilt Chamberlain did. By the end of the season, the Philadelphia Warriors won 49 games, which was the second best record. He won the Rookie of the Year and the MVP. He's only the second player to accomplish this feat along with Wes Unseld. The numbers he recorded were nothing short of spectacular. He averaged 37.6 points and 27 rebounds per game. That is currently the second highest rebounds per game and the 5th highest points per game average for a single season. Keep in mind that before 1960, no one had been able to average over 30 points per game. In the playoffs, Wilt was able to continue playing at a historic level. There were 2 games where he scored over 50 points. One came in the series-deciding game against the Syracuse Nationals, and the other against the Boston Celtics. However, the Warriors weren't deep enough to defeat the two-time defending champions. Wilt's greatness alone wasn't going to be enough. He was so frustrated with the results that he announced that he was going to quit the sport. This was something that brought a lot of negative attention to his mentality. The owner of the Warriors even came out and said that he wasn't surprised with his decision. In his sophomore year in Kansas, he did the exact same thing. When they lost the NCAA championship game, he announced that he would quit playing basketball. Instead of celebrating the historic year that he had, he was being crushed for being a sore loser. This was the start of the love-hate relationship he had with the media. Wilt came off a rookie season where he was clearly the best player in the world and he had the greatest individual season ever. Now he has set the bar to an impossible standard. The expectation was that he needed to produce record-breaking numbers every single game. He came back in his sophomore year and did exactly that. In 35 out of the 79 games that he played, he scored over 40 points. In only 3 of those instances, he pulled down less than 20 rebounds. That includes 8 games where he scored over 50 points. For example, against the Los Angeles Lakers, he posted the outrageous stat line of 56 points on 54% shooting and 45 rebounds. Believe it or not, that is only an honorable mention for the best games he had that year. His season high in points came against the New York Knicks when he had 67 points on 73% shooting and 31 rebounds. Only Wilt would be capable of scoring over 60 points and pulling down over 30 rebounds. On top of that, he recorded the 6th most efficient 60-point game ever. If you think that's impressive, he had the greatest rebounding game. In the first regular season matchup against the Celtics, he went for an NBA record, 55 rebounds along with 34 points. Wilt nearly out-rebounded the Celtics by himself as they finished with 59 boards. He dominated his rival, Bill Russell, on the glass, and he was limited to only 19 rebounds. When he was asked about the record-breaking performance years later, he said this, quote, "The thing that I remember most about the 55 rebounds was when the game was over, that I was probably more tired than I've ever been in my entire life." End of quote. The numbers don't lie. He was once again the best player in the world by a considerable margin. He led the league in points and rebounds again. He averaged 38.4 points and 27.2 rebounds per game. That is the highest rebounds per game average for a single season ever and the 3rd highest points per game average. This played a huge part in the Warriors finishing with the 3rd best record in the NBA. But in the playoffs, they couldn't even pull out a victory against the Syracuse Nationals. They were swept 3-0. You couldn't blame Wilt for that. He stayed up to par with his regular season averages. His teammates, on the other hand, were cultivating the bad habit of relying too much on Chamberlain to win games. The New York Times called their play after the series lethargic. In Game 3, Tom Gola and Paul Arizin fouled out in the final minutes, leaving Wilt to win the game by himself. This did not leave a good impression with the rest of the league, and he was slighted big time when the players had him 4th in MVP voting. Maybe some of that had to do with the Warriors ending with fewer victories in the previous year. Maybe they were penalizing him for the way their season ended. Or maybe he just fell short of the impossible expectations that everyone had for him. Maybe they thought that if he was truly the best player in the world, shouldn't his team also have the best record? There's nothing on record that explains the reasoning behind that decision. All we can do is speculate, but we can draw the conclusion that the world expected him to be perfect. I can assure you that the expectations they had for the 2nd place MVP finalist, Bob Pettit, were not the same as what they had for Wilt. And when he didn't reach them, they made him pay for missing out on these type of awards. But if they wanted more, that they were going to get their wish in the following season when he decided to rewrite the history books. This is unquestionably the greatest regular season by a player, and it ain't even close. We all understand at this point that the numbers that he posted are somewhat misleading. There were many more possessions than they are now, and blah blah blah. We've all heard it a million times before. But on the other hand, they play the same 48 minutes as they always have. Nowadays, it's frowned upon when a coach wants to play their star player over 40 minutes in the regular season. It's an injury waiting to happen. Wilt wanted to play every second of the game, running up and down the court, grabbing every rebound, and taking shot after shot. And this dude averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds for an entire season. We should be marveling that an athlete was able to pull the impossible. This was a record-breaking season in every sense of the word. To start off, here are all the relevant records that he was able to break. He's the only player to record over 4,000 points in a season and to average over 50 points per game. He recorded the most 60-point games with 16 total. He recorded the most 50-point games in a season with 45 total. He recorded the most 40-point games with 63 total. And he's the only player to average more than 48 minutes per game for a season. Some of his most notable performances include the game against the Lakers, where he had 78 points and 43 rebounds. There was a game against Chicago, where he had 73 points and 36 rebounds. But nothing was bigger than when he faced the New York Knicks in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Of course, we're talking about the 100-point game. I shouldn't have to put this in perspective, but there is one stat that should be able to impress everyone. Just from that season alone, there were 39 times when a team scored under 100 points. Wilt could have defeated those teams by himself on that fateful day. The unfortunate thing is that there is no video footage of that historic game. There's only a radio broadcast for part of that game. By the way, this is what usually happens at NBA games during this time, something that I thought was common knowledge. So put your tin hats away, because we're not going to even entertain ridiculous conspiracy theories that this performance never happened. But to have an idea of how we reached the century mark, here's what Philadelphia Daily News' Jack Kaiser wrote about that historic night. Quote, "He made some he wouldn't have dared taken under ordinary circumstances. Long jumpers from 25 to 30 feet out with 2 and 3 men clinging on the wiry 260-pound frame. Power-packed dunk shots when he had to bull through, around, and over tight knot of defenders. Blazing speed that carried him down court for layups after he had launched a fast break with a rebound himself. He earned every point." End of quote. This game is the perfect representation of the legacy of this season. A lot of people were blown away by his performance, while others did not view it positively. Many players and coaches were upset about how this game played out in the fourth quarter. The Knicks players were fouling other players to keep the ball away from Wilt, and they also tried to run out the clock. The Warriors responded by fouling them to get the ball back. It was obvious that they were trying to help their teammate reach 100 points, which is to be expected. This is something that happens all the time when a player threatens to score over 70 points. It no longer becomes a normal game. It's all about seeing how much that player can score. But that's nothing compared to the all-time snub that he suffered. The players of the league made the incredibly stupid decision of awarding the MVP to Bill Russell. It's obvious that they were not fans of this level of selfishness. It's the only way I can explain the reason why they chose Russell. If the team had wildly underachieved, I could kind of understand snubbing him. However, the Warriors won 61% of their games. Guess what? That's a 50-win season if they had played 82 games. That's more than enough for him to win the MVP by a landslide. Maybe they had grown numb to the record-breaking numbers. Who on earth knows? What he needed to do now was win the title. It's the only reasonable expectation after the type of season he had. In the playoffs, they had to face a familiar foe. For the third straight year, they faced the Nationals in the semifinals. The series was pushed to the deciding fifth game, and that is when Wilt had his greatest playoff performance. He recorded his playoff career high of 56 points and 35 rebounds. He was clutch, he was aggressive, is what the sports world was waiting to see in a moment like this. This surely gave him and his team all the confidence in the world to defeat the mighty Celtics. It was a classic series where each team traded off victories. For the Warriors' first 2 wins, Wilt recorded over 40 points and 30 rebounds. In the 7th game, it was one of the most entertaining finishes that the league had seen. It was a total team effort by the Warriors. The rookie, Thomas Sherry, led the way with 32 points. That was huge, considering that Bill Russell did a great job of limiting Chamberlain to 22 points on 15 shot attempts. However, the New York Times lauded Wilt's performance by saying he was outstanding on rebounds, blocking shots, and setting up plays. That was almost enough to defeat this team. But they got their hearts broken when Sam Jones made this incredible shot over Wilt with 2 seconds left. It was a bitter way to end such a historic season. He was learning the hard way that a great team will always defeat a great player. Little did he know that the team situation was only going to get worse. The year in question is the 1962-63 season of Wilt Chamberlain, the year after he averaged 50 points per game and broke hundreds of records. He continued his dominant ways by having yet another historically great season from a statistical standpoint. He averaged 44.8 points per game on 53% shooting, 24.3 rebounds per game, and 3.4 assists per game. Here are the current records that he holds. He recorded the 2nd highest points per game average, the 6th highest rebounds per game average, the 9th highest PER, and the 10th highest win shares for a single season in NBA history. He was a complete monster. But look at the record his team had. The San Francisco Warriors went 31-49. So here's the question. How much of the blame can we reasonably put on Wilt Chamberlain for missing the playoffs for the first and only time in his career? Because the numbers that he put up were insane. He obviously led the league in both points and rebounds, but he also had the highest field goal percentage, win shares, offensive win shares per 48 minutes, and PER in the league. He was still undeniably the best player in the world. We just can't ignore the dozens upon dozens of records that he broke just because his team underperformed. But then we look at the competition of the league that season, and it's hard to give him a full-on pass for not carrying his team to the playoffs. 6 of the 9 teams in the NBA made the postseason during that time, so all you had to do was be better than 3 other teams. That doesn't sound like such a burdensome task. What I'm going to do is give both sides of the case. Let's start with everything Wilt did right that season. There were 30 total games where he scored over 50 points. To put that in perspective, the player that's recorded the second most career 50-point games is Michael Jordan, and he's had 31 total. At this rate, it's hard to imagine anyone passing him in career 50-point games. It will nearly surpass what MJ did in his career in just one season. Out of those 30 games, there were 3 times where he scored over 70 points, and 6 other games where he scored at least 60 points. This is only the second time that a player has posted multiple 70-point games in the same year. The other time, as you would have guessed, came in Wilt's 1961-62 season. His season high came against the New York Knicks when he had 73 points and 14 rebounds. That almost felt like a letdown compared to the 100-point game that he had against them in the prior year. Let's talk about a few other record-breaking performances that he had. There's a game against the Syracuse Nationals when he had 70 points on 71% shooting, 18 rebounds, and 3 assists. This is only the 3rd time that a player shot over 70% from the field while scoring over 70 points. Then there was a game against the Lakers where he had the rare stat line of 63 points and 30 rebounds. We also have his performance against the Detroit Pistons where he had 50 points and 41 rebounds. That is only the 5th time that a player has recorded over 50 points and 40 rebounds in a game, which were all done by him. As far as his advanced metrics go, he is only one of 6 players to reach over 20 win shares for a season. That just shows how valuable he was to his team. The Warriors were not a strong team by any stretch of the imagination, due to the various changes in the offseason that caused the roster to be severely depleted. The biggest change was that the franchise was relocated to the city of San Francisco. This was a major move, and not all the players on the team could afford to move their families out west. So that caused the Warriors' second leading scorer, Paul Arizin, to retire. Then the team's 3rd leading scorer, Tom Gola, was asked to be traded to an Eastern Conference team after playing only 21 games. Now all of a sudden, Wilt was stuck with a team that was dreadful on offense, and they were even more horrendous on defense. They allowed 120.6 points per game, which was the worst in the league. Sports Illustrated described the team this way, quote, "The whole dull show was Wilt Chamberlain, who averaged 44.8 points per game, while the rest of his team forgot to score. The Warriors defense was beyond disparagement because there was no Warriors defense. When the ball got to Chamberlain, the rest of the Warriors would react as if they were watching a spectacular Pacific sunset. They would be open-mouthed and motionless because Wilt Chamberlain leads the world in taking shots." End of quote. You gotta love the journalism of the 60s. As harsh as he sounded, he wasn't wrong. It seemed like Wilt's solution to the team's incompetence was to win games by himself. I know we say that a lot for players who are in similar situations, but this is the one time where we mean this quite literally. Once the ball reached his hands, it was not going back out. Let's be honest. How would you expect the team's morale to be when a player scores 53 points on 23 of 60 shooting while dishing out only 2 assists? And here's something else. There are 5 other times where he had over 40 shot attempts and 0 assists. He took ball hogging to a whole other level. That is not a recipe for success, no matter how talented a player is. For the basketball purists that existed at the time, it was no surprise that the Warriors went through an ugly stretch where they lost 14 of 15 games, which also included an 11-game losing streak. Although he averaged 47.9 points per game, he still wasn't doing enough to help his team win. He learned the hard way that he was never going to be considered a winner if he tried to score 100 points every game. But in the final 20 games of the season, something changed. He started to get his teammates involved more, and they were winning more than they had all year long. They went 9-11, and Wilt averaged 42.7 points per game, 25.1 rebounds per game, and 5.4 assists per game during that span. He posted 3 triple-doubles, which was something he never accomplished prior to that season. That included a 50-point triple-double that he had against the Pistons. It was a positive sign that he was willing to change. This team lists on his roster some of the slowest and worst shooters ever to play in the NBA. No, those aren't my words. That is a direct quote from a 1964 Sports Illustrated article. And if you don't trust the journalistic work from people that witness this atrocity of a team, here is a quote from the head coach of the San Francisco Warriors. "I realized how completely inadequate the team had become. They were even incapable of beating a squad of rookies." That was the team that Wilt Chamberlain was stuck with in the 1963-64 season, and he carried them all the way to the finals. How was he able to do this? Did he average 50 points per game like he did in 1962? Believe it or not, his scoring production decreased by a lot, but he found the secret to success that allowed him to have one of the greatest individual seasons in NBA history. A disappointing season. Do you know what the Warriors did to improve their roster? Absolutely nothing. This was the exact same team that finished with the 3rd worst record. So at the start of the season, Sports Illustrated wrote that they were the obvious choice to finish with one of the worst records in the NBA. They just didn't have enough talent to give Wilt any kind of help on the offensive end. To have a better idea of this, let's take a brief look at the top 3 scoring options the Warriors had. Their second leading scorer was Tom Sherry. The first word that Sports Illustrated used to describe this player back in 2017 was that he was tall. That's never a great sign. Other than his height, he was also known for being a tough and passionate player. Those are great qualities to have for a role player, a glue guy. But for your second scoring option, you want something a little bit more. He averaged 13.5 points for the season. Right behind him was Wayne Hightower. In the previous year, the Philadelphia Daily News sports writer Jack Kaiser called him the biggest disappointment to hit the NBA in years. So there's that. Although the New York Times also described him as a tenacious rebounder, scoring wasn't his thing. That explains why he only averaged 13.2 points on 38% shooting. Last but not least, there was Guy Rodgers. I'm not about to disrespect this Hall of Famer. He was one of the best floor generals in the NBA. He was a high IQ player, and he knew how to pass it to Wilt even when he had multiple players guarding him. He was responsible for a lot of the points he scored. He was legitimately a great point guard. But again, scoring wasn't his strong suit. He averaged 11 points on 36% shooting. With that context in mind, how was Wilt able to turn this team around? Although they made no significant changes to their roster, they did add a valuable piece. They hired head coach Alex Hannum. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he was the coach for the 1967 Philadelphia 76ers, which was the team where Wilt won his first championship. They had the most dominant season in league history up to that point, in large part because he convinced Wilt that he no longer needed to be a volume scorer. That was the first time they averaged less than 30 points per game, and the Sixers were able to win a record-breaking 68 games. However, it was much easier to convince him to give the ball up when you have all-star players such as Hal Greer, Chet Walker, and Luke Jackson on your team. That wasn't the case for the 1964 San Francisco Warriors. He had every right to not trust his teammates. But to his credit, he was able to convince them to trust his teammates and to dominate the defensive end as he does on offense. Here was the type of season that Wilt had. He averaged 36.9 points on 52% shooting, 22.3 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. He went from averaging 2.4 assists in 1962 to doubling that total 2 years later. He was a much more willing passer, and that helped uplift the energy level that his teammates played with. But their biggest improvement came on the defensive end. They went from finishing dead last in opponents' points per game and having the 4th worst defensive rating to finishing first in opponents' points per game and second in defensive rating. Wilt was the reason behind their dominant defense. He earned a 10.6 defensive win shares, which is the 8th highest mark for a single season. That was the key to their success. Of course, his willingness to pass the ball gave his team a whole new outlook. But if you look at the numbers, they finished last in points and 3rd to last in offensive rating. Their biggest strength was defense, and that is where he made his biggest impact. It was truly Russell-esque. The main difference is that Bill Russell could never dream of putting up the numbers that Wilt was recording. For example, there were 9 games where he scored over 50 points. There were also 2 games where he recorded a 40-point triple-double. The end result was that the Warriors increased their win total by 17 games. They finished with 48 wins and the 3rd best record in the league. He also earned a mind-blowing 25 win shares for the season, which is the 2nd highest mark ever. I believe this is one of his greatest accomplishments. He single-handedly turned this laughingstock of a team into a championship contender. How he didn't win the MVP that year just blows my mind. As great as Oscar Robertson was, it just doesn't compare to the degree of difficulty of Wilt's season. But the question remained, could he carry this team to the finals? They had to go through a tough St. Louis Hawks team led by Bob Pettit and Lenny Wilkins. They also had depth. They had Hall of Fame players such as Cliff Hagan, Zelmo Beatty, and Richie Guerin. Despite all the weapons they had, the Warriors kept the series competitive. They were tied at 2 apiece, and Wilt had one of the greatest performances of his playoff career. In Game 5, he went for 50 points on 69% shooting, 15 rebounds, and 6 assists. After losing in Game 6, it all came down to the deciding Game 7. This was going to determine who was going to play the Boston Celtics in the finals. During this time, Wilt was being criticized for not coming through in pressure games. They would usually bring up his performance in the 1962 series against Boston. In Game 7, he scored 22 points on 15 shot attempts. This was the same player that averaged 50 points on nearly 40 shot attempts that season. No one could understand why he wasn't more aggressive in such an important game, but he responded to his critics in a resounding way. He recorded 39 points on 66% shooting, 30 rebounds, and 6 assists. In the end, the San Francisco Warriors pulled the impossible. They went from being one of the worst teams in the NBA to reaching the finals. The sole reason for their success was Wilt Chamberlain. Take a look at the numbers for that series. He averaged nearly 40 points per game, with no other teammate averaging over 18 points. He not only carried them offensively, but his presence in the paint helped contain Bob Pettit to 42% shooting. That's a 4% drop from his regular season average. It was an incredible all-around performance from Chamberlain. In the finals, they lost in 5 games. They were simply no match for the mighty Celtics, who could neutralize Wilt much better than any other team could. But just imagine if this version of Chamberlain had a decent squad. I believe they would have taken over the league by storm. Despite coming up short from reaching the ultimate goal, this doesn't take away from what he accomplished in this forgone season. In my opinion, it's one of the 10 greatest seasons in NBA history. In my latest book, where I rate the top 300 regular seasons by a player, I had it ranked 8th all time. Where would you have this ranked? Do you believe this should be considered Wilt's greatest season? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.